Hey there, friends. I'm glad you're here. Tonight, I've got a story you're going to love. But before we settle in, go ahead and hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss any of these cozy tales. And hey, drop a comment letting me know where you're tuning in from and what time it is where you are. It's always amazing to see our little storytelling circle stretch across the globe. Now dim those lights, get comfy, and let's drift into tonight's journey together. Let's travel far back in time, really far, around 100 million years ago, to a world so different from today, it might as well have come from another planet altogether. At that time, the Earth didn't know what snow was. Ice didn't sit on the north or south poles, and there were no chilly winters nipping at anyone's nose. Instead, the entire planet was warm, lush, and green, almost like it had wrapped itself in a cozy blanket of sunshine. If you were to visit this time, the first thing you'd notice is the heat. Not a dry desert kind of heat, but more like the heavy, steamy warmth of a giant greenhouse. It was tropical nearly everywhere, from the equator to the poles. Rainforests didn't just exist near the middle of the planet. They stretched almost all the way up to the Arctic Circle. Imagine palm trees in places that are now covered in snow, and flowers blooming in regions where we now wear thick winter coats. The Earth's atmosphere was thick with carbon dioxide, a gas that held in the sun's heat like a giant thermal curtain. Volcanoes were extremely active back then, spewing carbon dioxide into the air constantly. These volcanoes, while destructive in the moment, acted like long-term climate changers. And the continents, oh, they were still on the move. Back then, the land masses looked nothing like they do today. The supercontinent Pangaea had already broken apart, but the pieces hadn't drifted too far yet. Huge chunks of land were slowly floating across the Earth's surface, carried along on the back of molten rock deep beneath the crust. These slow, creeping movements would eventually shape the Earth into what we know today. But for now, the pieces were still rearranging themselves. Dinosaurs ruled this warm world. Not just a few types, either. There were hundreds, maybe thousands of species roaming across jungles, plains, and swamps. Giant sauropods with long necks stretched high into the tree canopies, munching leaves lazily under the hot sun. Raptors with sharp claws and keen eyes stalked the shadows, always hunting, always alert. And of course, the mighty Tyrannosaurus Rex stomped through forests, its roar echoing over the landscape like thunder. Everywhere you looked, life was thriving. Insects buzzed through the air, some the size of birds. Huge dragonflies flitted above still water, while early birds and feathered dinosaurs chased them for lunch. In the rivers and swamps, strange creatures splashed about, ancestors of crocodiles, turtles, and fish we still see today. The oceans were even more alien. There were no polar ice caps, so sea levels were much higher. In fact, much of what we consider land today was deep underwater back then. Imagine North America split down the middle by a wide, shallow sea. The Western Interior Seaway, as it's now called, stretched from the Gulf of Mexico all the way to the Arctic Ocean. It was filled with marine reptiles like mosasaurs, giant, sharp-toothed swimmers that looked like something out of a night. Sharks were already patrolling the depth, though they didn't quite look like the ones we know now. And the coral reef, they were buzzing with color and life. Tiny shelled creatures built limestone homes that turned into underwater cities. Giant clams, snails, and ammonites, those spiral-shelled sea creatures called the ocean's home. Above it all, the sky was hazy but bright. The sun shone through a blanket of clouds, casting a golden glow on the land. Storms were frequent, especially in the tropics. Without any polar ice to stabilize the weather, winds shifted quickly and sometimes violently. But the plants didn't mind. Giant ferns, cycads, and towering conifers soaked in the light and drank up the rain, growing taller and thicker each year. Back then, flowering plants were just beginning to take off. Before this time, most of Earth's greenery came from ferns and cone-bearing trees. But slow, delicate flowers began to bloom across the landscape. They were small and simple at first, but they brought color and eventually fruit. This would change the game for insects and animals alike. Bees, for instance, were beginning to evolve alongside these flowers. As plants started producing nectar to attract them, bees helped spread pollen from one flower to another, making it easier for plants to reproduce. This teamwork between plants and pollinators would become one of the most important partnerships in the history of life. But while life on Earth was blooming, deep below the surface, something else was happening. The slow churning of the Earth's molten interior kept pushing and pulling the continents. This movement, called plate tectonics, was more than just a shuffling of land. It changed the shape of oceans, built mountains, and even influenced the climate. As land masses moved, they affected ocean currents, which in turn affected the movement of heat around the globe. Right now, in this warm, green world, the currents flowed freely around the equator and up toward the poles, keeping temperatures high everywhere. But if a continent were to drift into a new position, it could block those currents or send them in new directions. That in time would begin to change the planet's temperature. Of course, none of the animals living back then knew any of this. They simply lived their lives, eating, hunting, nesting, surviving. But the stage was being set for a much colder future. Some of the earliest mammals were also alive at this time, though they were small and often overlooked. Little, furry creatures that scurried through the underbrush, hiding from the larger reptiles and birds. They weren't very impressive back then, just rodent-like survivors with sharp teeth and fast feet. But their time would come. What's remarkable is how balanced everything was for a while. This warm world, despite its storms and volcanoes, provided the perfect conditions for life to flourish. But nothing on Earth stays the same forever. Slowly, almost unnoticeably, things began to shift. The continents kept moving, inch by inch. Antarctica, which at the time was still connected to other southern land masses, started drifting toward the South Pole. It was still warm, covered in forests and dinosaurs, but its direction was clear. Eventually, it would become a frozen desert. As Antarctica moved southward, it would later cut off warm ocean currents that once circled the globe. That change would cool the southern oceans and start building the first permanent ice caps. But for now, it was still a green land under a golden sun. Even the North Pole, which today is covered by the Arctic Ocean and sea ice, was lush and swampy at the time. Fossils found in the Arctic show that turtles, alligators, and even palm trees once lived up there. It's hard to imagine, but the poles weren't always frozen wastelands. That's the thing about Earth, it's always changing. Sometimes slowly, sometimes suddenly, but always in motion. And while this chapter of the planet's history was filled with heat and growth, it was also the beginning of a long, slow journey toward cold. The warmth of 100 million years ago wouldn't last forever. Volcanic eruptions would come and go. Sea levels would rise and fall. Species would vanish, and new ones would take their place. Eventually, the planet would tilt, wobble, and shift in its orbit just enough to invite the cold in. And when that happened, the world would look very, very different. But we're not there yet. Right now, Earth is still basking in its warmth. Dinosaurs still roam freely. Forests stretch from pole to pole. Oceans shimmer under the hot sun. Life thrives, unaware of what the future holds. This is the calm before the frost. The age of warmth, wonder, and wild growth. A planet alive with possibility, spinning slowly toward a destiny wrapped in ice. 50 million years ago, the Earth was still wearing its warm coat, though there were a few rips starting to show in the seams. It was still mostly tropical, steamy, and lush, with jungles covering much of the land and warm waters stretching across the seas. Dinosaurs were long gone now, wiped out by a giant space rock that crashed into Earth around 66 million years earlier. That impact had shaken the planet, changed the skies, and left room for new creatures to rise. And rise they did. This was the age of mammals. Creatures with fur, warm blood, and sharp minds began to take over the niches left behind by the dinosaurs. Some of them grew big, really big. There were enormous rhino-like animals, the size of small buildings, and early whales that looked more like crocodiles with flippers than the whales we know today. Bats flapped through the skies, rodents scurried under, and strange hoofed mammals wandered across open plains. Birds were everywhere too. With their ancient dinosaur cousins gone, they had the skies all to themselves. Giant flightless birds roamed the ground like feathered tanks, while smaller ones darted between trees and coastlines. Nature was busy rebuilding its balance after the chaos of the extinction, but deep beneath the surface, the earth was still rumbling. Slowly, steadily, silently, the continents were on the move. One of the biggest changes happening during this time involved a landmass you know well, India. Today it sits at the bottom of Asia, but back then it was on a wild ride. Millions of years earlier, India had broken off from a huge southern continent called Gondwana and started drifting northward across the ocean, like a floating raft heading for a crash. And crash it did. Around 50 million years ago, India slammed into the bottom of Asia with incredible force. When land masses collide like that, they don't just bounce off, they crumple, buckle, and rise. That's exactly what happened when India met Asia. The result, the birth of the Himalayan mountains. Now mountains aren't built overnight. They take millions of years to push upward and settle into their majestic shapes. But this was the beginning. The Himalaya, including Mount Everest, the tallest mountain on Earth, started to rise from the earth like slow-moving giants. And these mountains were more than just pretty peaks. They changed everything. See, when you build a wall that big, it messes with the weather. The rising Himalayas blocked warm, wet air from the Indian Ocean, causing it to dump rain on one side and create dry conditions on the other. Over time, this helped shape places like the Tibetan Plateau and the deserts of Central Asia. But that wasn't the only climate twist caused by the collision. The growing mountains also exposed more rock to the air, and when rain hits certain kinds of rock, it causes chemical reactions that pull carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. That's right, those giant rocky walls were actually helping cool the planet, little by sucking out the very gas that helped keep things warm. Meanwhile, down near the South Pole, another quiet transformation was underway. Antarctica, which had once been connected to South America and Australia, was drifting farther and farther south. It didn't look anything like the frozen continent we know today. Back then, it was still green and forested. There were trees, rivers, and even some animals roaming about. Fossils show that marsupials lived there along with ancient relatives of ducks and frogs. But the more it moved toward the pole, the colder it got. This slow movement didn't happen in a weekend. It took millions of years, but with every inch southward, Antarctica began to change. And with it, the balance of the Earth started to tip. As Antarctica drifted south, something important happened. It began to cut off ocean currents that had previously circled the planet like a warm water belt. Before, these currents moved freely, carrying heat from the equator up toward the poles and keeping everything nice and toasty. But as Antarctica isolated itself, those currents were blocked, twisted, and rerouted. That meant less warm water reached the southern seas. And when that happened, the ocean temperatures started to drop. Slowly, steadily, the waters around Antarctica began to cool. And when ocean water gets cold enough, something amazing and a little bit scary starts to happen. Ice forms. At first, it was just snow that stuck around longer than usual. Then year after year, the snow didn't melt. It piled up, got heavy, and compressed into ice. Eventually, Antarctica started to wear a patchy coat of white, the first steps toward becoming the frozen land it is today. This change was subtle. Nobody at the time, no mammal, no bird, no dinosaur holdover would have noticed it happening. But it was the beginning of a deep and important shift. Earth was moving from a hot, steamy greenhouse world into something else entirely. A world that could freeze. And that changed everything. The creatures of this time still lived as if nothing had happened. Huge whales swam through open sea, learning to dive deeper and travel farther. Early elephants roamed grasslands, their noses slowly evolving into trunks. Primates, our ancient relatives, began swinging through trees in warm forests. Curious and clever, they didn't know it, but their world was slowly tilting toward an icy future. Over in Europe and North America, the forests were still thick and green, but some areas began to cool. The first hints of open grasslands appeared, replacing thick jungles with wide, breezy plains. New kinds of animals adapted to these spaces. Fast runners, grazers, and hunters that could chase across open land. Climate wasn't just cooling in the far south, it was beginning to ripple across the globe, not all at once, not suddenly, but like a slow breath being drawn in, a pause before the chill. As Earth's orbit shifted, its tilt changed slightly, and its wobble slow. Small but powerful changes began stacking on top of each other. That's the thing about climate. It doesn't need one big event to change, just a few steady nudges over time, and the planet starts to become something new. By now, it had become clear that the Earth wasn't going to stay warm forever. The writing was on the wall, or rather in the rocks, the skies and the oceans. The collision of continents, the rise of mountains, the shifting current, and the drifting land masses had started a chain reaction. In a few million more years, Antarctica would become fully encased in ice. Greenland would start following the same path, and the poles would finally become the frozen guardians of Earth they are today. But at this point, Earth was still in between, still clinging to the warmth of its youth, but no longer untouched by time. It was a planet preparing for transformation, though no creature could see it coming. This was the turning point, the quiet moment when the balance began to shift. When the Earth, ever so slowly, began its long journey into the Ice Age. By the time we reach 34 million years ago, the world is starting to feel different. It's not a sudden change. Nothing in Earth's story ever is. But it's noticeable if you look closely enough. The skies are clearer in some places. The air feels crisper, and something strange is happening at the far edges of the map. Ice is starting to appear. Yes, real ice, not just a dusting of frost or a chilly morning, but thick, heavy, permanent ice. For the first time in tens of millions of years, parts of the planet are beginning to freeze and stay frozen. And once ice shows up, it doesn't go quiet. It spreads, it lingers, it changes everything. Let's head south, far, far south, to a place that's about to become famous for being cold. Antarctica. Today we know Antarctica as a massive white desert, a land of snowstorms, glaciers, and endless ice sheets. But back in the day, it was completely different. Before this chapter in Earth's story, Antarctica wasn't frozen at all. It had forests, lakes, and even small mammals wandering through its greenery. Fossilized leaves, tree trunk, and bones still buried in the soil prove it. But around 34 million years ago, things began to change. Antarctica had been drifting southward for a while now, slowly sliding closer to the South Pole like a giant on ice skates. As it moved, it separated further from the other continents, South America to the west and Australia to the east. Eventually, the oceans pushed into those gaps, and that's when a new player entered the scene: the Antarctic Circumpolar Current. This current is basically a massive band of cold water that started swirling around Antarctica, and once it got going, it locked the continent in a cold embrace. Warm waters from the tropics could no longer sneak in to warm up the southern lands. The result, a dramatic drop in temperature. Now picture this: year after year, snow falls on Antarctica. Not a lot at first, but enough. The cold means the snow doesn't melt in summer like it used to. It piles up, compresses, turns into ice. This is the beginning of what scientists call an ice sheet, a mass continent-sized blanket of frozen water that weighs more than you can imagine. Once that ice sheet started to form, it grew quickly, at least in geologic terms. It spread like a chill across the land, turning Antarctica from a green-breathing wilderness into the icy fortress we recognize today. But the change didn't just stay down south. The birth of Antarctic ice sent ripples through the entire planet's climate system. Temperatures started to cool elsewhere too. Oceans, which love to share their mood with the air above, began to chill. And when the oceans cool, the atmosphere listens. As the world cooled, plants and animals everywhere had to adjust. In the warm, lush forests of North America, South America, and Europe, some species thrived while others began to disappear. Tropical plants struggled to keep up with the changing seasons. Trees that preferred warmth started to vanish, while others that could handle cooler air took their place. Grass, once just a background plant, began to spread. This might sound like a small thing, but it was huge. Grasses opened the door to whole new ecosystems. Grassy plains, open savannas, and wind-swept steppes. And those landscapes called for new kinds of animals. Big herbivores like early horses, rhinos, and antelopes started showing up in greater numbers. They had teeth perfect for grinding dry grasses and legs built for running across open land. And where there are herbivores, predators aren't far behind. Early carnivores, fast and smart, followed them into this new colder world. But cooling also meant loss. Some creatures couldn't handle the drop in temperature. Certain reptiles, amphibians, and insects, used to a more tropical life, saw their numbers shrink. Extinction doesn't always come with a bang. Sometimes it's a slow fade, a quiet vanishing act written in the fossil record. Meanwhile, in the ocean, something equally big was happening. The cooling seas allowed new kinds of marine life to emerge and evolve. Whales were growing larger and more specialized. Some became filter feeders, sucking up tiny creatures called krill by the bucket load. Others hunted fish and squid with sharp teeth and clever tactics. Cold water carries more oxygen, which meant life beneath the waves could get bigger and more energetic. But cold water also meant changes in currents, ecosystem, and migration patterns. Everything from tiny plankton to giant sharks had to adjust. Even our distant relatives were feeling the shift. Early primates, the ancestors of monkeys, apes, and eventually humans, had to adapt to new kinds of forests and different food sources. Some went extinct while others learned to move, climb, and eat in new ways. It was a quiet time of trial and error, a slow but important evolution that would eventually lead to us. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. The important thing to understand here is that the cooling wasn't a temporary thing. It wasn't just a chilly season or a cold snap. This was the start of a long-term trend, a steady, persistent move toward a colder Earth. The planet was shifting gears. For the first time in a very long time, Earth had a true polar ice cap. This moment, about 34 million years ago, is what scientists call the Eocene-Oligocene transition. The Eocene, with its warm forests and tropical rains, was giving way to the Oligocene, a cooler, drier, more open world. It's a line in the geologic record, a boundary in rock, in fossil, and in ice. Of course, Earth didn't become a snowball overnight. There were still warm places, the tropics remained tropical, and life flourished in many parts of the world. But the balance had shifted. The poles were no longer just icy in the winter, they were icy year-round. And once permanent ice is on the scene, it starts to play a big role. Ice reflects sunlight, sending heat back into space instead of letting it soak into the ground. That creates a feedback loop. More ice means more reflection, which means more cooling, which means even more ice. It's like Earth had turned a corner. There was no going back to the steamy greenhouses of old. The planet was entering a new chapter, one where ice would be a regular part of the story. The animals changed. The plants changed. Even the landscapes changed. Mountains stood taller, shaped by glacial erosion. Rivers carved deeper valleys swollen by meltwater in the spring. The world was still beautiful, still alive, but it had a new energy, a new rhythm. Looking back, this time period might not seem as dramatic as the days of dinosaur extinction or asteroid impacts. But make no mistake, this was one of the most important transitions in Earth's history. The start of the ice ages wasn't marked by explosion, but by something even more powerful, time. And so, with snow falling more often, ice creeping across the southern continent, and cool winds sweeping through ancient forests, the stage was set. Earth had taken its first step into the cold. The Ice Age wasn't here just yet, not fully, but it had made its presence known. Quiet, steady, and unstoppable. By the time we arrive at around 20 million years ago, The Earth has fully committed to its new direction. The Earth has fully committed to its new direction. The earthy whispers of cold from the previous chapter are starting to turn into something louder, something you can feel in your bones. The chill that began in Antarctica is now on the move, seeping slowly but surely into more parts of the world. This is when the glaciers really begin their march. But before we dive into all things icy, let's set the stage a bit. The planet is still teeming with life, and while the climate is cooling, it's not frozen solid everywhere. This is not yet the ice age you might picture. No woolly mammoths or saber-toothed cats, just yet. But the seeds of those icy ages are being planted right here, during this time. Let's start with the big movers, literally. The continents. They're still slowly drifting across the globe like giant rafts on a very patient ocean. India, which had already crashed into Asia millions of years before, is pushing up the Himalayas higher than ever. Those towering mountains are starting to affect weather patterns across Asia, pulling moisture from the air and creating dry regions inland. Meanwhile, Africa is inching northward toward Europe, setting the stage for more collisions and mountain building there too. These movements might seem slow to us, but they're game changers for Earth's climate. As continents shift, they reshape ocean currents and wind patterns. They build mountains that trap clouds or redirect rain. They change the shape of coastlines and sea levels. And all of that affects how heat moves around the planet. And speaking of heat, there's less of it now. Not because the sun is dimming or anything dramatic like that. It's more about how Earth is managing its own internal thermostat. Those polar ice sheets are reflecting sunlight away. The oceans are cooling, and carbon dioxide levels are slowly but steadily dropping. Carbon dioxide, or CO, is like Earth's favorite blanket. A little bit of it keeps the planet cozy. Too much, and we overheat. Too little, and things get cold fast. Around 20 million years ago, CO2 is slipping lower, and that's one of the big reasons glaciers are growing. Now let's talk about those glaciers. You've seen pictures of glaciers today, massive rivers of ice crawling down mountains inch by inch. But back then, they weren't just isolated to the peaks. They were expanding across entire regions, especially in the southern hemisphere. Antarctica, now fully isolated and surrounded by that cold circumpolar current, is buried under ice. Thick sheets are pressing down on the land, carving valleys and smoothing out hills. Over time, they're pushing out toward the sea, forming towering cliffs of ice that carve into the water with booming crashes. But the real surprise, ice is starting to appear in the north too. The Arctic doesn't yet have a permanent ice cap like Antarctica does. That won't come until much later. But glaciers are popping up in the high mountains of North America, Europe, and Asia. These are the early signs of what's to come, cold creeping into places that haven't seen it in millions of years. And glaciers don't just sit around. They move. Slowly, yes, but they're not frozen in place. They slide under their own weight, dragging rock and soil with them. They carve out valleys, flatten hills, and leave behind scars in the landscape that can still be seen today. This glacial movement reshapes the face of the planet in ways that are quiet but powerful. Imagine watching a mountain range change shape, not in a sudden earth, but over thousands of years as ice scrapes across it like a colossal chisel. And all this change affects life too. Ecosystems are shifting again. Grasslands are spreading wider and deep, especially in places like Africa and Asia. The forests are still there, but they're retreating in places, giving way to open plains. These open spaces become the stage for an explosion of mammal evolution. Now, if you could stand on one of these ancient plains, say, in what is now Kenya or Mongolia, you'd see some familiar shapes. Herds of early elephants, not quite the same as today's giants, roam the land. Long-limbed antelope dart through the grasses. Rhinoceroses, some the size of trucks, graze on tough plants. And among all these large herbivores there are predators. Big cats, early hyenas and others stalking the tall grass. Survival here is a full-time job. You've got to be fast, smart and ready to run. Primates are changing too. Some are staying in the trees where they've always been comfortable, but others are spending more time on the ground. It's safer there in some ways, but riskier in others. You're closer to predators, but you can also cover more ground in search of food. This small change, just a little more time on the ground, will one day lead to something incredible. The first steps of early humans. But we're not there yet. Let's swing back to the ocean, because they've got their own story going on. The seas are cooling along with the air. This change brings deep sea currents into sharper focus. These currents act like giant conveyor belts, moving warm and cold water around the globe. As they strengthen, they help spread the cooling influence of the poles to every corner of the ocean. Cold water also means more oxygen, and that's a boost for marine life. Whales, dolphins, and seals are evolving rapidly during this time. Fish populations shift and migrate. Coral reefs adapt or vanish depending on the temperature and acidity of the water. Everything is moving: glaciers, animals, currents, wind, even the shape of the land itself. Earth is alive in every sense, just moving to a slower, colder rhythm. This chapter in Earth's story is often overshadowed by the more dramatic ice ages that come later, but in a way, this is the beginning of those ages. The glaciers of 20 million years ago are the scouts, the early warning signs that ice is here to stay, and the planet is adjusting to it, bit by bit, mountain by mountain, herd by herd. The march of the glaciers has begun. The real deep freezes are still millions of years away, but the path is clear now. The Earth is heading deeper into the cold, and it's not turning back. By the time we arrive at 5 million years ago, the world has changed in ways that would have seemed impossible just a few chapters ago. The warm, tropical planet of the dinosaurs is now a place of growing shadows and spreading cold. The glaciers haven't taken over completely, but they're no longer guests. They're starting to settle in like permanent residents. Ice is becoming a defining character in the story of Earth. And where there's cold, there are giants. This chapter is all about the creatures that rise to meet the chill. Huge animals with thick fur, powerful limbs, and the kind of grit it takes to survive in a world where snow and wind are the new normal. But before we meet them, let's take a moment to look at the bigger picture. Earth is officially entering what scientists call the Pliocene epoch. It's a transitional period, one that bridges the gap between the ancient world of earlier mammals and the modern ecosystems we know today. Temperatures are still dropping overall, but it's not a straight shot into deep freeze just yet. There are ups and downs, warm spells and cold snaps, like nature is testing out how far it can push things before it commits to the full ice age plunge. One of the biggest changes during this time isn't happening in the air or the ice, but in the seas. You see, something huge is happening in Central America. The continents are playing a game of connect the dots, and the result is the formation of the Isthmus of Panama. Before this moment, North and South America were separate landmasses, and the oceans between them flowed freely. But now, volcanic activity and shifting tectonic plates are slowly building a land bridge that changes everything. When the isthmus closes the gap between the continents, two major things happen. First, ocean currents are completely rerouted. The warm waters of the Atlantic can no longer mix freely with the Pacific, so they're pushed north, helping to fuel a new current we still rely on today, the Gulf Stream. This current pumps warm water from the tropics up toward Europe, which will have huge consequences later on, especially when ice tries to take over the northern lands. Animals that had once evolved in isolation on different continents can now meet face to face. It's called the Great American Interchange. North American animals like bears, horses, and saber-toothed cats migrate south. Meanwhile, South American species like giant sloth, armadillos, and terror birds head north. It's like opening the gates to a giant prehistoric zoo, where every species has to figure out who eats who and fast. And let's not forget Africa. Over there, the landscape is shifting just as dramatically. The lush, green forests that once covered much of the continent are shrinking. In their place, wide grasslands are spreading. This is the birth of the savannah, and it changes everything for the animals living there. This is also where our own ancestors begin to take shape. Somewhere in East Africa, early hominins, our distant relatives, are adapting to life on the ground instead of swinging through the trees. They walk upright, perhaps awkwardly at first, but they're learning. With hands free, they can carry things, tools, maybe, or food, or even each other. These first steps on two legs are small, but they'll lead to something unimaginable. But let's get back to the giants. The colder climate of the Pliocene favors megafauna, a fancy term for really big animals. Why so big? Well, being large helps conserve body heat. The more massive you are, the harder it is for the cold to seep into your core. That's why we start seeing animals that are not just furry but massive. Take the mastodons, for instance. These shaggy, elephant-like creatures roam through North America and parts of Eurasia. Their long tusks help them dig through snow to find food, and their thick coats keep them warm in harsh winters. Then there are the giant ground sloths of South America. Imagine a sloth the size of a car, plodding slowly through ancient forests, using its enormous claws to rip leaves and branches from trees. They're not the fastest creature, but they don't have many enemies either. Not many predators are brave enough to mess with something that big. Woolly rhinos are starting to appear in parts of Europe and Asia, sporting thick skin and powerful horns. And giant beavers paddle through ancient rivers, some of them reaching lengths of over 7 feet. That's right, 7 feet of chonky teeth gnashing dam-building beaver. But perhaps the most iconic of all these creatures, though still evolving in the shadows at this point, is the woolly mammoth. They're not in full woolly form just yet. That's coming a bit later. But their ancestors are already roaming the north, growing bigger and hairier with each generation. As all these creatures adapt to the seasons begin to take on sharper edges. Winters grow colder, summers shorter. The land is becoming a place where only the tough survive. To help with survival, animals are learning new tricks. Herds get larger, so there's safety in numbers. Some creatures learn to hibernate through the coldest months. Others migrate, chasing the sun across continents. And with all this shifting and shuffling of species, predators are stepping up their game. In the grasslands and forests of North America, you might hear the low growl of saber-toothed cats. These fearsome hunters with their oversized fangs and muscular frames are built for ambush. They don't chase, they pounce. Quick and brutal. Elsewhere, early versions of wolves and big cats begin to form packs and hunt in groups. These tactics aren't just clever, they're crucial in a world where prey animals are often larger than the predators themselves. And as the land changes, so does the plant life. Forests thin out in places while tundra begins to stretch across the north. Grasses evolve to become tougher, more resistant to cold and better at surviving under snow. Trees like pines and firs begin to dominate colder climate, their needle-like leaves designed to endure bitter winds and long winters. This era is the rehearsal before the main act of the Ice Age. Everything is in motion. The glaciers haven't yet covered all the continent, but they're creeping. Animals haven't hit their peak size or fluffiest coats, but they're getting there. And early humans haven't yet left Africa, but they're beginning to think in new ways, sharpening tools, watching the skies, making choices. The Pliocene is the last deep breath before the plunge. In just a couple million years, Earth will dive into full-on Ice Age conditions. The glaciers will spread far and wide. Sea levels will fall. Herds will grow bigger. Predators will grow bolder. And humans, they'll begin a journey that will eventually take them across every corner of the globe. But for now, in this moment, the world is colder than it's ever been, but also more alive than ever. The giants are rising, the cold is settling in, and the story of the Ice Age is just getting started. So, here we are, standing at the edge of a truly icy adventure. The time is around 2.5 million years ago, and the planet is about to take a sharp turn into what we officially call the Quaternary period. It sounds like a name you'd find in an old geology textbook, but really, it just means this is when Earth goes full-on winter mode. The Ice Age is no longer just an idea waiting in the wings. It's stepping onto center stage. Let's take a moment to imagine the Earth right now. The air feels colder, sharp, and crisper almost everywhere you go. Not just in the Arctic, but in places that were once warm and leafy. Glaciers, those slow-moving rivers of ice, are creeping down from the poles, growing bolder and bolder with each passing century. Think of them like quiet but relentless giants, inching their way south, bulldozing forests and mountains as they go. It's not a one-time freeze, though. This is something way more complicated. Earth is now entering a series of glacial cycles. Times when the planet gets cold, then slightly warms up, then gets cold again, over and over, like it's breathing in and out with ice. These ice pulses come and go in cycles that last tens of thousands of years. During glacial periods, temperatures drop dramatically, ice sheets expand, and sea levels fall. Then during interglacial periods, the ice retreats a little, and things warm up again just enough to give life a break. But how does all this freezing and thawing even happen? Well, a lot of it comes down to Earth's relationship with the sun. There's a guy named Milutin Milankovic, a Serbian scientist from way later in time, who figured out that changes in the Earth's orbit and tilt affect how much sunlight different parts of the planet get. These changes happen slowly, over thousands of years, and they're kind of like Earth adjusting the dimmer switch on its cosmic lighting system. Less sunlight means colder weather. More sunlight means a bit of a thaw. It's like the whole planet is riding a very slow roller coaster made of heat and ice. Now, let's zoom in and look at what this frozen drama means for life on Earth. To put it simply, everything is changing. Again, the continents are more or less in the positions we recognize today. Those sea levels are constantly shifting with the push and pull of glaciers. When the ice sheets grow, they trap a lot of water in frozen form, so the oceans shrink. During these times, coastlines stretch farther out, and even new land bridges appear between places that were once separated by water. One of the most famous of these is the Bering Land Bridge. It connects what is now Russia with Alaska, and later it'll become the path that early humans used to move into North America. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Let's talk about the animals. By this point, the megafauna, those giant cold-loving creatures we started meeting in the last chapter, are everywhere. They're not just surviving the cold, they're thriving in it. It's like the Earth has become a icy stage for nature's most dramatic winter production. The mammoths are starting to evolve into their most iconic form, the woolly mammoth. Picture a creature as tall as a bus, covered head to toe in dense fur, with long curved tusks that look like frozen sabers slicing through the wind. These tusks aren't just for show, they're used to fight, to dig through snow, and even to move ice out of the way when searching for grass beneath the frost. Then there's the woolly rhinoceros, a hulking beast with a thick pelt and a massive horn, built for life on the tundra. You could spot one from a distance, slowly trudging through the snowy plains as steam rises from its broad back in the early morning cold. Saber-toothed cats, with their oversized teeth and powerful limbs, lurk at the edge of forests and snow-covered grasslands. They're patient hunters, built for explosive sprints, waiting to pounce on anything that strays too far from the herd. And those herds, they're enormous. Hundreds of giant deer, steppe bison, and muskoxen moving together, making the ground tremble beneath. Even birds grow bigger and hardier during this time. Giant vultures and ravens soar above the icy world, looking for scraps left behind by predators or the occasional frozen carcass thawing just enough to be scavenged. And let's not forget the giant ground sloths. These towering creatures continue to lumber across South America, still hanging on in their corner of the world, using their claws to pull down tough frozen branches. But among all these creatures of fur, tusk, and claw, something new is happening. Something small, almost easy to miss if you weren't looking closely. Humans are on the rise. Well, not quite us yet, but our ancestors, early hominins, are evolving fast. The species known as Homo habilis, has entered the sea, and with it comes a spark of something the world has never seen before: invention. These early humans aren't just reacting to the cold like the animals around them. They're starting to plan ahead, to create, to change the world around, even in small ways. They craft tools from stone, simple but effective. Sharp edges made from flint or other hard rocks are used to cut meat, scrape hides, and shape wood. Fire, once only a part of nature, is slowly becoming a tool too. Maybe they find it after a lightning strike and learn to keep it alive by feeding it twigs and bark. Maybe they learn to protect it, carry it from place to place, even nurture it like a living thing. This is the beginning of human technology, and though it's humble, it changes everything. Back then, life isn't easy. It's dangerous and cold, and every day is a battle to find food and stay warm. But early humans are beginning to form tight-knit groups, sharing responsibility, watching out for one another. Family bonds grow stronger. Communities begin to form. Language is still developing, but gestures, facial expression, and grunts are evolving into more meaningful communication. A warning shout, a laugh, a call for help. It's not just survival anymore. It's the very early roots of culture. Meanwhile, nature continues its frozen rhythm. Glaciers march across the continents, carving valleys, reshaping mountains, grinding everything in their path. You can still see their scars today, in places like the Great Lakes in North America, or the fjords of Norway. These are all legacies of the deep freeze that began right here during the early days of the Quaternary. As the ice spreads, forests retreat, deserts shift. Even the animals that don't go extinct are forced to migrate, adapt, or evolve. And yet, in the middle of all this cold, the earth is alive, pulsing with energy. Every snowstorm, every avalanche, every frost-covered sunrise is part of the great breathing rhythm of the Ice Age. We're now in a world where survival depends on more than just instincts. It depends on adaptation, intelligence, community. This is the world that will shape the destiny of life on Earth for the next 2.5 million years. And at the heart of it, slowly learning, slowly building, are our ancestors, watching the ice, watching the animals roam, and starting to imagine something different. Not just surviving, but changing the world. This is the real beginning of the human story. And the Ice Age is far from over. Here we are again, standing at the edge of time, peering into the Ice Age once more. The year is now around 1 million years ago, and the Earth is in the thick of what we can call the Pleistocene epoch. It's still covered with glaciers dominating large parts of the planet. But there's a shift, a quiet one, almost like the hum of a distant fire starting to grow into something more. This is when humanity's story truly begins to take shape. Up until now, we've been watching from the sidelines, seeing humans as these small early hominins, just barely managing to survive in a world dominated by mammoths and saber-tooths. But now, they're moving into the spotlight in a much bigger way. The ice isn't as thick as it was before, but it's still everywhere. Across vast stretches of the northern hemisphere, glaciers are spreading their frozen fingers, reshaping the landscape as they go. It's hard to imagine, but some places that we now think of as warm, like northern Europe, are being slowly turned into frozen tundras. Even parts of North America, like Canada, are covered in thick sheets of ice, pushing the limits of where life can survive. But not everyone is retreating into caves or huddling next to fires. No, humans are doing something a little more incredible. They're learning to adapt, and adapt they must, because the Ice Age isn't a passing moment. It's a chapter that will stretch across millennia, and life in it requires more than just surviving the cold. It requires ingenuity. Let's focus on our ancestors for a moment. The Homo erectus. These are the hominins that were beginning to dominate the planet at this point, not the fragile creatures they once were. Instead of just wandering from one place to another, Homo erectus was starting to carve out a place for themselves in the world. Slowly but surely, they weren't just living, they were thinking. The tools they used were becoming more sophisticated. Early humans had been using stones for hundreds of thousands of years, but now those tools were more refined. Think of simple axes, scrapers, and sharp-edged blades made from flint or other hard rocks. They had learned not just how to use these tools but how to shape them for specific tasks, whether it was for cutting meat, breaking bones for marrow, or scraping hides. These tools were more than just survival. They were proof of human ingenuity, proof that the mind was starting to work in ways that would lead to far greater innovations in the future. One of the most important things that happened around this time was the development of fire. Humans were no longer just finding fire after lightning strikes or by accident. They were learning how to control it. This was huge. Fire wasn't just about warmth. Although that was crucial in an Ice Age world, it was also about cooking food, making tools, and protecting themselves from predators. It became something that helped to define humanity. People began to gather around fire pits, socializing, sharing stories, and learning from each other. And speaking of fire, let's talk about how human communities were growing. It's clear that these early humans were not living in isolation. They were beginning to form groups, small tribes or bands of people who helped each other survive in this harsh world. These groups weren't just about hunting and gathering, they were also about cooperation. These early humans started to learn how to work together to bring down large prey like mammoths and giant deer, or even to defend themselves against predators. But even as humans begin to settle into these more stable ways of living, they're still at the mercy of the ice. As the glaciers continue to advance, the weather grows harsher and cold creeps deeper into the land. Life for these early humans is a constant battle to stay warm, stay fed, and stay alive. Yet through all of this, something amazing is happening. They're adapting. For instance, the human body is changing slowly but surely. Homo erectus individuals were taller and had bigger brains than their ancestors. They also had bodies that were built for walking long distances and surviving in harsh climates. Their limbs were long and lean, great for endurance running or walking, which would have been useful when tracking herds of animals across the cold, open plains. The body was slowly evolving to match the environment. And then there's the migration. One of the defining features of this time is how humans are spreading out from their origins in Africa. They begin to move north into areas that were once too cold for human life to survive. These early migrants didn't just stop at the Middle East or Southern Europe. They kept going. Homo erectus, with their growing toolkits and ever-expanding survival strategy, start moving into places that are covered in ice, and they begin to adapt to these new harsh environments. This is how humanity began to conquer the Ice Age. It wasn't by hiding from it, but by embracing the challenge. As they move north, humans encounter new kinds of challenges and creatures they've never seen before. The animals that roam the ice are not always friendly. Herds of wild bison, giant elk, and woolly mammoths still dominate the landscape. But now early humans are not just surviving off these animals, they're beginning to use them for a variety of purposes. They're making tools from bones and hides, building shelters from mammoth bones, and even crafting clothing from the fur of large animals. It's not just a question of surviving the cold anymore, it's about using the environment to thrive. And then there's something even more remarkable. Humans are beginning to leave footprints on the land. Physical evidence of these early migrations and adaptations has been found in the form of stone tools, animal bones, and even early dwellings. These are the first marks of humanity, left behind in the ice, like tiny whispers of the past. It's as if the earth itself was taking note of their existence, marking the beginning of something much larger. But the Ice Age isn't done with them yet. As the glaciers continue their slow crawl across the land, humanity is not done adapting. The cold may have its grip on the earth, but humans are showing that they're made of something tougher. They're not just passive survivors of nature, they're changing nature itself, using fire, tools, and innovation to create a new way of life, even in the face of a frozen world. As the glaciers push forward and the Ice Age deepens, early humans are also slowly spreading their influence across the planet. The world is becoming theirs to shape, one small step at a time. And in that moment when humanity finally leaves its mark on the Ice Age becomes not just a time of cold and survival, but a beginning a beginning of human history, of adaptation, of survival, and of a people who were slowly but surely carving out their place in a world that wanted to freeze them out. But they didn't just survive it, they thrived. We've traveled through time together, moving from the distant days of the Ice Age into a world that is both harsh and thrilling. But now, around 800,000 years ago, something important is about to happen that will change the course of history forever. This is the moment when the Great Divide takes shape, not just in the landscape, but in the human family itself. It's when humanity starts to truly split into different paths, and these paths will shape the future of the species in ways no one could predict at the time. Imagine the Earth, still frozen in many places but with pockets of warmth that allow pockets of life to flourish. The glaciers, although massive, are not as unrelenting as they were before. They retreat and advance with the slow and steady rhythm of the Earth's pulse. And this fluctuation has a profound effect on the environment. As the planet cools and warms in these glacial cycles, animals and humans alike are forced to either adapt or perish. In this frozen world, early humans continue to evolve, and with them, the very tools that allow them to survive and thrive. But now, the tools are getting better, sharper, and more specialized. These aren't just crude rocks smashed together anymore. These are finely crafted stone points, hand axes, and even early forms of spears. They've learned how to make the most of their environment, how to use the materials around them to craft the perfect tool for hunting or protecting themselves from predators. It's about this time that humans are starting to spread across the globe in a more diverse way. Until now, Homo erectus has been the dominant species, adapting to life in the Ice Age with their ingenuity and growing social structures. But now, the Great Divide is upon us, and Homo erectus is starting to share the stage with other human species. This is when we first see the emergence of Neanderthals in Europe and parts of Asia. They're an entirely different branch of the human family, with their own set of traits, tools, and ways of living. While Homo erectus roams the savannas and forests, Neanderthals are carving out their own niche in the cold, icy landscapes of northern Europe. They're well suited to life in the frigid world, with their stocky bodies that retain heat far better than long-limbed humans. Their thick, muscular frames are built to withstand the cold, and their brains are larger than those of Homo erectus, suggesting a complex understanding of the world around them. But what's even more intriguing about these Neanderthals is that they're not just surviving in the Ice Age, they're thriving. They're crafting intricate tools, hunting large game like mammoths and woolly rhinos, and even using fire to keep warm in their stone shelters. They might not have the same level of cultural complexity as modern humans, but they've certainly figured out how to live in a world that's not only cold, but incredibly dangerous. Meanwhile, on the other side of the world, Homo erectus is continuing its march across the globe. These early humans are moving farther and farther from Africa, settling in Asia, Southeast Asia, and even the islands of what we now call Indonesia. Their journey is one of survival, yes, but also of exploration and discovery. And in this moment, they begin to encounter other challenges, climatic shifts, new predators, and new sources of food. But they are nothing if not adaptable. They find new ways of coping with changing landscape, from building shelters that protect them from the cold to developing more efficient ways of hunting. The next big shift comes in the form of fire. By now, fire is no longer just a tool for warmth, it's a game changer. Early humans are using fire not only for warmth and cooking, but also for protection and signaling. This is when fire becomes an even more essential part of daily life, marking a shift toward more settled and social lifestyles. People gather around campfires at night, sharing stories, telling tales, and perhaps even passing down knowledge from one generation to the next. This is where the seeds of early culture begin to take root, even before there's a fully formed language. But the real story here is about survival. how humans are learning to live in an increasingly hostile world, one that's not just defined by ice, but by the ever-changing climate, the struggle for resources, and the need to adapt to both nature's challenges and each other. And here's where the divide deepens. You see, not all humans are adapting in the same way. Homo erectus, while smart and capable, is still struggling to truly master the complex challenges of the Ice Age. They're finding themselves in competition with Neanderthals and other emerging human species, each one vying for the same resources in a landscape that's becoming increasingly fragmented and dangerous. Now, for the first time, humanity is not just living alongside other species, they're in direct competition with them for survival. The Neanderthal, with their superior cold tolerance, might have the edge when it comes to surviving in the freezing, harsh climates of Europe. But Homo erectus has flexibility. They're more capable of adapting to warmer climates and less restrictive environments. At this point, humans are encountering a truly diverse range of habitats, from frozen tundras to tropical jungles, and they're figuring out how to exploit every single one of them. In some places, Homo erectus and Neanderthals are competing for the same food sources, while in others, they're simply coexisting, neither one knowing what the future will bring. And then there's the migration. Humans continue to spread out, moving into new territories and encountering new challenges. This movement is no longer just about survival, it's about exploration, about seeing what's beyond the horizon, about finding new places to call home, whether that's in the snowy hills of Europe or the warmer climes of Asia. But the competition is fierce. As Homo erectus and Neanderthals continue to move, they begin to come into contact with each other in new ways. They don't just share tools and resources, they share ideas. Maybe they exchange hunting techniques, maybe they trade fire-starting methods, or maybe they learn from each other's mistakes. What's clear is that these interactions are shaping the course of human history in profound ways. The divide between Homo erectus and Neanderthals grows, and over time, it will lead to the extinction of one branch of humanity and the rise of the other. But what's truly remarkable is that these two species are not isolated, far from it. They share the same environment, face the same challenges, and perhaps even influence each other in ways we can't fully understand yet. In the end, the story of the Ice Age is one of survival, of overcoming the odds, and of a species learning how to live in a world that was often hostile and unforgiving. As the glaciers recede and the climate shift, the great divide between the human species becomes more pronounced. But even as one species fades, the other continues adapting and surviving, carrying the torch forward into the future. As humans continue to spread across the earth, they leave behind traces of their existence, footprints on the icy landscape, marks on the walls of caves, and bones that speak of their struggles and triumphs. It's not just about surviving anymore, it's about becoming. This is when the Ice Age truly becomes a time of transformation, a time when humanity began to divide, but also to unite in ways that would shape the course of history for millennia to come. The world is a different place now. Around 500,000 years ago, the Earth is still frozen, yes, but there is something new in the air. A sense of change, a kind of evolution that stretches beyond the land and into the very spirit of humanity. The Ice Age is no longer just about survival, it's now about mastery. Humanity has adapted so well to the cold, so deeply intertwined with the shifting glaciers, that it has become a true force of nature in its own right. This period marks a monumental shift in how humans interact with their environment, how they respond to the harsh conditions around them, and how they begin to carve their place in the world. For the first time, humans are no longer just enduring the cold, they are learning to dominate it. To understand this shift, we have to look at the two species that are the focus of this time, the Neanderthals and the early Homo sapiens. The Neanderthals, who have been carving out their place in Europe and parts of Asia, are evolving to survive in an even colder world. Their stocky, muscular bodies are perfect for the icy tundras, allowing them to conserve heat and thrive in the midst of the harshest winters. Their faces, with large brow ridges and wide noses, are adapted for the freezing air, able to warm it before it reaches their lungs. Neanderthals are masters of the cold, no question about it. They have already developed sophisticated tools for hunting large game, tools that help them bring down mammoths, bison, and other massive creatures. These tools, made from flint, bone, and even wood, are proof of the ingenuity they've developed over the years. But what makes them true masters of the cold is their ability to use fire to their advantage. They build shelters from the bones of the very animals they hunt, creating refuges that keep them warm against the relentless cold. Around these shelters, Neanderthals gather in social groups, warming themselves by firelight, sharing stories, and strengthening the bonds that will help them survive. But they aren't the only ones mastering the cold. Far to the south, in Africa, a new kind of human is emerging, Homo sapiens. The first traces of our direct ancestors are appearing on the seas, and while they are still far from the fully evolved humans we know today, there is something about them that's different. They aren't quite as specialized for the cold as the Neanderthals, but they are incredibly resourceful, and it is this resourcefulness that will define their future success. Homo sapiens are moving north toward the frigid territories that the Neanderthals have already mastered. They might not be as physically built for the cold, but they have something else, an ability to adapt in ways that others can't. They create tools that are not only effective for hunting, but for changing the environment itself. They develop sophisticated weapons, like spears and bow and arrow technology, that allow them to hunt at greater distances and with greater precision. They learn to work together in ways that are different from the Neanderthals, using communication and cooperation to bring down large prey, to defend against predators, and to solve the challenges they face as they journey into these new, colder lands. In fact, it's this ability to innovate that will set Homo sapiens apart from the Neanderthals in the long run. While the Neanderthals are still primarily focused on surviving the cold, with their raw physical strength and social bond, Homo sapiens are beginning to think beyond simple survival. They're starting to craft art, to create symbols and expressions that speak to their deeper understanding of the world. The beginnings of culture emerge in this time, and with it comes a growing sense of identity. But this is not an easy transition. The land is harsh, and the competition is fierce. As Homo sapiens begin to move into the territories of the Neanderthals, they face the reality of living alongside them. There is tension, competition for resources, and perhaps even some level of conflict. The Neanderthals are well established in these cold, frozen landscapes, and they do not take kindly to newcomers who are encroaching on their territories. But even as Homo sapiens push deeper into these northern reaches, they are not doing it alone. They are learning from the Neanderthals, adapting their technique and refining them to suit their own needs. It's in this time, around 500,000 years ago, that something incredible begins to happen. The first true evidence of complex social structures begins to emerge. Homo sapiens, with their increasingly advanced communication and cooperative skills, start forming groups that are larger and more organized than ever before. They aren't just surviving as individuals or even small family units. They are starting to work together on a much larger scale, creating communities that can withstand the toughest conditions the Ice Age has to offer. But even as these social structures grow, the environment continues to change. The glaciers advance and retreat, the climate fluctuates, and the world continues to test humanity's ability to survive. And this is where Homo sapiens start to shine. They are not just able to adapt to these changes, they are able to predict them, to plan ahead, and to develop new strategies for coping with the shifts in the environment. They begin to create shelters that are more permanent, more comfortable, and more effective in protecting them from the harsh elements. They begin to fashion clothing that is better suited to the cold, using animal hides, furs, and even bone needles to stitch together garments that will keep them warm through the long frozen winters. And with all of this innovation comes something else: culture. As Homo sapiens become better at adapting to their environment, they begin to explore their own humanity. They create art, carvings, paintings, and sculptures that speak to their understanding of the world, their beliefs, and their experiences. It's in this time that humanity begins to create stories, to build narratives that explain the world around them, and to pass these stories down from generation to generation. It's a pivotal moment because it marks the beginning of something deeply human, something that will shape the course of history for thousands of years to come. The real breakthrough, however, comes when Homo sapiens start to fully dominate the environment. By the time we reach 500,000 years ago, these early humans are not only surviving the Ice Age, they are shaping it. They have learned how to harness the forces of nature, how to use fire, tool, and cooperation to create a world that works in their favor, not against them. The Ice Age, once a symbol of isolation and struggle, becomes a world that is tamed, shaped by the hands of humanity. As Homo sapiens continue to adapt and evolve, the divide between them and the Neanderthals grows clearer. The Neanderthals, with their incredible physical strength and mastery of the cold, are still thriving in some places, but they are not evolving at the same rate as Homo sapiens. The Neanderthals' reliance on their physical traits and their social structures, while powerful, are not enough to keep pace with the rapid advancements of Homo sapiens, whose ability to innovate, create, and think abstractly will eventually make the difference. It's not just about surviving anymore, it's about thriving. Homo sapiens are becoming masters of the cold, not just because they can endure it, but because they have learned to manipulate it, to shape it, and to create a world where they are not victims of the environment but its masters. The Ice Age is still in full force, but humans have become its true rulers. It's no longer about how they survive, it's about how they shape the world to fit their needs, how they create a place for themselves even in the coldest corners of the earth. And as the glaciers continue to move and the world shifts around them, Homo sapiens are ready, their path set for the journey ahead, a journey that will take them far beyond the cold, into the future of humankind. The world is changing in profound ways, and humanity, in its own quiet corner of the earth, is on the brink of something extraordinary. Around 300,000 years ago, the world is still locked in the grip of the Ice Age. The glaciers towering over the land, the winds howling through the frozen expanse. Yet, in the midst of this, a quiet revolution is unfolding. It is not a revolution of war or conquest, but one of the mind, a transformation of the human moment where innovation begins to take hold in ways that will shape the future forever. At this time, Homo sapiens, the ancestors of modern humans, are still very much in their infancy. They are scattered across Africa, but slowly they are starting to form deep, more complex connections with the land around them. They've long mastered survival strategies, hunting, gathering, fire-making, but now they are beginning to push the boundaries of what it means to live on this earth. This chapter is about a time of discovery, not just the discovery of the environment around them, but the discovery of themselves. It's a period when human beings begin to shift from existing simply as creatures that endure the world to those who actively engage with it, change it, and in doing so transform their place within it. In many ways, this is the dawn of culture. It's a time when Homo sapiens begin to craft more than just survival tools. They craft stories, tools of art, symbols, and techniques that will become the foundation of civilization itself. The shift from basic tools like flint hand axes and bone spears to more refined instruments is a testament to the growing sophistication of the human mind. But what exactly is happening in these moments of profound change? Well, for start, Homo sapiens begin to develop a new kind of tool making. They start to craft not just utilitarian objects for hunting or survival, but objects that serve a broader purpose. There are ornaments, jewelry, and items that go beyond simple function, objects that hold meaning, beauty, and significance. These early humans are starting to engage with their world, not just for the sake of survival, but for a deep, more symbolic connection to their existence. The tools that Homo sapiens are crafting are becoming more complex. No longer are they just using rudimentary stone tools. Instead, they are working with bone, antler, and other materials to create items that are intricately carved, carefully designed, and more efficient than ever before. It is a testament to their growing understanding of the world around them, and it shows their burgeoning ability to manipulate it to suit their needs. It's no longer just about hunting or gathering. Now it's about shaping the world, about molding the environment to their will, about living beyond the basic struggle for survival. Alongside these advancements in tool-making, something else begins to emerge: art. The first true evidence of human creativity comes to light around this time, and it marks a significant step forward in the evolution of humanity. Humans begin to create cave paintings, carvings, and sculptures that speak not just to their immediate needs, but to their deeper understanding of the world, their place in it, and their connection to the creatures and forces around them. These early artistic expressions are not just about beauty, they are about meaning, symbolism, and the human desire to understand the mysteries of life. The cave paintings, for instance, aren't just depictions of animals that early humans hunted. They are representations of the spiritual world. They show animals in motion, captured in ways that suggest not just an artistic skill but an awareness of the connection between humanity and the natural world. These are not merely images, they are symbols, and they speak to something deep within the human spirit. It's as though early humans are reaching out, trying to connect with forces they cannot see, forces that shape their world and their very existence. As the world remains locked in the cold of the Ice Age, these advances in culture, art, and technology do more than just define Homo sapiens as a species. They set the stage for the rise of civilization itself. These early humans are learning how to live in harmony with their environment. Yeah, but they are also learning how to shape that environment, how to manipulate the forces of nature to their advantage. They are no longer just survivors, they are creators, shaping the world with their hands, their minds, and their hearts. At this time, humans are still largely living in small, close-knit groups, but the bonds they share are stronger than ever before. There is an undeniable sense of community, a collective spirit that allows them to thrive in the face of the harshest conditions imaginable. These groups are not just gathering for survival, they are gathering for shared purpose, for ritual, for connection, and for the simple joy of being together. They are beginning to understand that they are not isolated beings, but part of a greater whole, connected to one another and to the world around them in ways that transcend the physical. The communities that are forming at this time are beginning to develop complex social structures, systems of organization that will eventually evolve into something much larger, into the foundations of society itself. There are leaders, individuals who guide and protect the group, but there are also specialists, those who are skilled in specific tasks, whether it's hunting, tool making, or art. These social roles are becoming more defined, and as they do, humans begin to work together in more coordinated ways, making their societies more resilient and capable of surviving the trials of the Ice Age. But it's not just about survival anymore. It's about thriving, about flourishing, in a world that seems intent on freezing everything in its path. The bonds of community grow stronger, as does the understanding that cooperation is essential to navigating this frozen world. Homo sapiens are learning how to work together, not just as individuals but as a collective, to meet the challenges they face and to create a world that is theirs to shape. The birth of culture, the rise of art and symbolic expression, and the development of more sophisticated tools mark a turning point in the history of humanity. These are not just physical advances, they are spiritual and emotional as well, a reflection of the growing complexity of the human mind. It is as if, in these small moments of discovery, early Homo sapiens are beginning to realize their own potential, their ability to not just survive but to create, to shape their world, and to connect with one another on a much deeper level. The dawn of innovation around 300,000 years ago is not just the beginning of new tools or new ways of life. It is the beginning of something far more significant, the birth of human culture in its truest form. And this culture, born out of necessity but growing into something far more complex, will continue to evolve and shape the future of humanity, guiding its development for millennia to come. At this point, Homo sapiens are not just surviving, they are beginning to flourish in the harshest environments known to humankind. The world is still cold, still unforgiving, but humanity has learned to adapt, to thrive, and to make the world its own. The true legacy of this time is not just in the tools or the art they left behind. It is in the spirit of human resilience, creativity, and cooperation that shines through every innovation, every new discovery, and every new step forward on the long journey of the Ice Age. The world of 200,000 years ago is one of extremes, where the Ice Age still holds sway over the land, turning the Earth into a giant frozen expanse of snow and ice. Humanity, however, has evolved in ways that have allowed it to not only survive this unforgiving environment, but to thrive within it. By now, Homo sapiens have fully embraced the challenge of the cold, adapting to the harsh conditions and using their growing intelligence to carve out a life in the midst of the glaciers and frozen forests. But despite this progress, the world they inhabit is still one of constant challenges, where the threat of extinction is ever present and the need for innovation and cooperation is crucial for survival. As the climate continues to fluctuate, there are places in the world where the ice and snow are particularly severe, creating what feels like a frozen peak of existence. The northern territories are the hardest hit, where the long winters seem to stretch on endlessly, and the sun never quite reaches the ground. These regions are home to some of the most isolated human groups, those who have been living in the coldest areas for millennia, developing techniques and strategies that allow them to endure in this brutal landscape. In these frozen territories, the ice is not just a barrier to survival, it is a way of life. People who live in these areas have come to understand the patterns of the ice, how it moves, how it affects the animals and the land, and most important, how it can be used to their advantage. They've learned to follow the migratory patterns of the great herds, using the ice to track down large prey like mammoths, bison, and reindeer. The people who live here are not simply existing, they are engaged in a continuous dance with the land, adapting to its rhythms and shaping their environment to suit their needs. At the same time, Homo sapiens are spreading across the globe, moving ever farther from their origins in Africa and into new territories, each more challenging than the last. It is during this period that humans begin to develop truly global communities, connected not just by their physical movements, but by shared knowledge, stories, and technologies that transcend geographic barriers. The small groups of people scattered across the frozen north are not isolated from one another. They are part of a larger network of people, all learning from each other, sharing their innovations, and helping each other survive in this unforgiving world. The way people are able to survive in such an environment is a testament to their ingenuity and adaptability. They've crafted specialized tools that allow them to hunt, fish, and gather in the harshest of conditions. Their clothing is made from the fur and hides of the very animals they hunt, designed to keep them warm during the long, brutal winters. They have mastered the art of firemaking, able to create warmth and light in the darkness of the endless nights. But it's not just about surviving the cold, they are learning how to thrive within it, to use it as a tool rather than an obstacle. The tools that Homo sapiens are creating during this period are becoming more specialized and more advanced. Early on, humans relied on simple hand axes, bone needles, and spears to hunt and gather food, but as the Ice Age progresses, they are learning to create more refined and effective tools. Their spear points become sharper and more aerodynamic, their needles finer, allowing them to sew clothing more efficiently. They develop harpoons for fishing and net for trapping smaller animals. These tools are not just practical, they are essential for survival in a world that demands constant ingenuity and resourcefulness. One of the most remarkable innovations of this time is the development of social structures that allow humans to live and work together in increasingly complex ways. These social systems are essential for survival in such a harsh world, where cooperation is the key to making it through the long winters and ensuring the success of the hunt. These early humans are learning that they are not just individuals fighting to survive, they are part of a community, and it is through the strength of that community that they can thrive. By now, humans are also developing a spiritual connection to the world around them. As the ice stretches across the land, they look to the skies and to the animals they hunt, seeking meaning in the world that surrounds them. This is the period when humans begin to create rituals, not just for survival, but for understanding the mysteries of life, death, and the forces of nature that seem so powerful and uncontrollable. It's in this time that burial rites begin to take form, where humans start to honor the dead, creating elaborate graves and offering tools and symbols for the afterlife. This marks a crucial shift in human consciousness, an awareness of mortality and a growing sense of connection to the larger world. The need for cooperation and social organization is more important than ever, and as the human groups grow larger, they begin to rely on leaders to guide them through the toughest of times. These leaders are not kings or chiefs in the sense that we understand them today, but they are individuals who hold the respect of their people because of their wisdom, their ability to predict the movements of animals, or their skill in crafting tools. Leadership is about knowledge, not just physical strength, and it is this knowledge that enables the groups to survive and thrive in a world that is increasingly unpredictable. Even as humans develop these complex systems of survival and cooperation, the Ice Age continues to challenge them in new ways. The glaciers are moving, the climate is fluctuating, and the land is changing. But Homo sapiens are beginning to master these changes. They are no longer simply reacting to the cold, the ice, and the snow. They are anticipating it, predicting it, and learning how to live with it in ways that no other species could. The mastery of fire is one of the key elements that allow Homo sapiens to conquer these frozen peaks of existence. Fire is not just a tool for warmth, it is a tool for cooking, for preserving food, for protecting themselves from predators, and for creating light in the dark. The ability to control fire allows humans to expand their habitats, to build shelters that are warm and safe, and to create a sense of security even in the cold, darkest months of winter. It is through fire that humanity begins to take control of the environment, shaping it to their advantage rather than being shaped by it. But despite all these advancements, there is still a long way to go. Humanity is still in the early stages of its journey through the Ice Age, and the challenges of the world are still immense. Yet it is in this moment, around 200,000 years ago, that Homo sapiens begin to move from being survivors to being masters of their environment. It is a slow and steady process, one that takes thousands of years, but the foundation is being laid for the great civilizations that will one day rise from the frozen earth. The frozen peaks of the Ice Age are not just a physical challenge, they are a symbol of the greater journey that humanity is undertaking. From these icy landscapes will come the stories, the inventions, the innovations, and the cultures that will define humanity for millennia to come. The Ice Age is not an obstacle to be overcome, it is the crucible in which human resilience, creativity, and innovation are forged. The world, frozen and harsh for so many ages, is beginning to thaw. It is a time of transition, and for humanity, the world is changing in ways that seem unimaginable. Just a few generations earlier, around 100,000 years ago, the Ice Age is slowly coming to an end, though the chill still lingers in the northern parts of the globe. For Homo sapiens, this change brings both opportunity and challenge. The thawing of the land is reshaping their environment, creating new landscapes, new resources, and new ways to live, but also new dangers and new difficulties to navigate. The warming world is both a blessing and a curse, and humanity must continue to evolve in order to thrive in this changing environment. As the glaciers begin to recede, the Earth's surface is left scarred, marked by the slow retreat of the ice that has held dominion for so long. The vast tundras and frozen plains of the north are now transforming into more fertile lands, with grasslands and forests replacing the ice and snow. This is a world that is starting to resemble the one we know today, a place where life can bloom in new and unexpected ways. The land is becoming more hospitable, but it is still a world in flux, and the people who inhabit it are learning to adapt to the shifting tides of climate, environment, and resources. The rise of the thaw is, in many ways, a metaphor for the shift that is happening within Homo sapiens themselves. After tens of thousands of years of struggle and survival, humanity is finally starting to find its stride. The people who live during this time are not just survivors, they are becoming builders, creators of something more than mere existence. They are beginning to craft not just shelters or tools, but societies, systems of order, and ways of life that will endure for millennia to come. This chapter is about the changes in human society as the Earth begins to warm. It is about the shifts in culture, in technology, in art, and in human consciousness that mark the end of the Ice Age and the dawn of a new era. The thaw is not just a physical event, it is a cultural, spiritual, and intellectual one. Humans are coming to terms with the world they inhabit and are learning to manipulate it in ways that will set them on a course for the future. The first sign that things are changing comes in the form of climate. The ice sheets that once stretched across continents are receding, and in their place, vast new landscapes are opening up. Forests are returning to the land, and the once barren tundras are becoming more diverse, with plants and animals. The shift in climate is bringing new opportunities for hunting and gathering, as previously barren lands are now teeming with life. The herds of large mammals that once roamed the icy plains are still there, but the animals are adapting to the changing environment, and so too must the humans who rely on them for sustenance. Homo sapiens are no longer just wandering nomads, drifting from place to place in search of food. They have learned how to settle in one place for longer periods, creating semi-permanent camps and shelters as they learn to manage the resources around them. The need to move constantly in search of food is slowly being replaced by the ability to store, preserve, and manage food supplies, which allows for more stable and complex social structures. This new way of living is allowing humans to experiment with new forms of organization, with the beginnings of leadership structures, shared resources, and communal living. One of the most important changes during this time is the development of domestic agriculture. Though it is still in its infancy, the practice of cultivating plants and raising animals for food is beginning to take root in certain regions. People are learning how to grow their food, to tame wild animals, and to use the land in ways that go beyond simple hunting and gathering. This early agriculture is not yet widespread, but it marks the first steps toward the development of permanent villages, towns, and eventually cities. It is a sign that humanity is no longer simply at the mercy of nature. They are starting to shape it to their own needs, taking control of the environment rather than being passive observers. As humanity begins to settle in one place, they are also starting to build more permanent structures. The shelters that once consisted of temporary huts made of animal skins and wooden branches are now becoming more complex, built from stone, clay, and wood. These new homes are more durable, offering better protection from the elements, and allowing people to live in greater comfort and security. The construction of these shelters marks a significant shift from the nomadic lifestyle that characterized earlier human existence, as people begin to invest more time and energy into creating homes and communities that will last. In addition to these advancements in housing, humans are also beginning to craft more sophisticated tools. While earlier tools were focused primarily on hunting and survival, the tools of the thaw are becoming more varied, with implements designed for farming, building, and domestic life. People are beginning to develop the wheel, the plow, and early versions of weaving and pottery, all of which will become the building blocks of civilization. These tools are more than just practical, they are symbols of humanity's growing mastery over the land and its resources. As humans become more skilled in managing their environment, their societies also become more complex. The social structures that emerged during the Ice Age are now being refined with more defined roles within the community. There are those who specialize in farming, those who make tools, and those who serve as leaders, guiding their people through the challenges of the thaw. These social divisions mark the beginning of more structured and organized communities, with roles and responsibilities being clearly defined and shared among the people. As the land warms and humans adapt to new ways of life, there is also a spiritual shift taking place. The early humans who lived in the Ice Age saw the world around them as a dangerous and unpredictable place, filled with threats and uncertainties. But with the thaw, there is a sense of hope that begins to take root. Hope that the world is becoming a better, more hospitable place. This newfound hope gives rise to a renewed connection with the earth, with the cycles of nature, and with the forces of life and death. Humans begin to celebrate the changing seasons, to honor the animals they hunt, and to acknowledge the power of nature in their lives in more meaningful ways. In the communities of the thaw, humans are also developing a deeper sense of community, a bond that goes beyond simple survival and into something more profound. People begin to celebrate their shared experience, creating rituals and festivals that bring them together. These gatherings are not just for practical purposes, they are also for celebration, for shared joy, and for the recognition of the accomplishments of the group as a whole. This sense of belonging, of being part of something larger than oneself, will become a defining characteristic of human society as it moves forward into the future. The thaw of the Ice Age is more than just a physical event. It is a symbolic representing the transformation of humanity from isolated groups of nomads to thriving, complex societies that will eventually lay the foundation for the great civilizations of the world. It is a time of great change, a time when humanity begins to leave behind the old ways and move toward the future. The challenges of the past, the ice and the cold, have shaped humans into resilient, resourceful beings. And as the land warms, humanity begins to realize its potential, ready to build a new world for itself, one that will last for millennia.